Hello, Andrew, and welcome everyone to the Tsaaro webinar on privacy challenges faced by HR. So, as all of you know, that this is GDPR week going on, right? And today we will be discussing the various aspects of data privacy related to HR. And before we start, a little bit about our speakers. So, I'm Siddharth, and I work as a senior data protection consultant at Tsaaro, and I am a CIPPE qualified privacy professional. And with me, we have Andrew David, who is a privacy program manager at Zoho. He's a fellow of information privacy. He's a CIPT, CIPM, CIPPE, CIPPUS, and he has more than 6 years of experience in the domain of data privacy.
Thanks for that intro, Siddharth.
About Tsaaro. So what Tsaaro does? So Tsaaro is a leading privacy and security services provider, and we help businesses and startup secure their applications through future-ready solutions that keep up with changing technology landscape. And our strength lies in assessing security risk, monitoring threats, and safeguarding applications against compliance issues. Right? And some of our key services are data privacy services, privacy trainings, privacy impact assessments, privacy by design services, and ISO 27701 services. And before we start, a disclaimer. So the presentation and the discussion points that are being held during this session are intended for educational purposes only and do not replace any independent professional judgment, professional recommendation, right? Attendees should note that this session is being recorded and may be shared, published on various medias, including print, audio, video formats, and without any further prior notice, right? And for any references, and this video is for only education purposes only. Like this webinar is only for education purposes. Okay. And here is the agenda that we'll be discussing today. So Andrew, this is the agenda that we will be speaking on. So we have introduction and data collected by HR, key changes brought by GDPR for HR, what HR needs to do to comply with GDPR, principles to be followed by GDPR, and what are the compliance benefits.
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Siddharth. So it was it's a nice time to talk about this, seeing that the GDPR day is coming tomorrow. And I want to thank Tsaaro for taking this initiative, the series of webinars to talk on some of these important, interesting matters as well. And, in my company, I was able to, work on GDPR full time, implementing that. I have first-hand experience working with all of these teams. So HR was one of the challenging teams to work with. And I think it's a good thing to talk about it today. So when I think about HR, right, the first point that comes to my mind is it is a complicated space, because when you talk about a normal data subject, like say, for example, in your marketing or something, they are people or consumers. But when it comes to HR, it is employees. Employees are, a more important entity than, say, in terms of privacy, in comparison to the customer. I mean, it is obviously subjective, but they have more rights, they have more importance in an organization, because they have to balance it with so many things. It is not a simple data management activity, that or a compliance activity rather, to manage employee data. So there are quite a lot of challenges, and thinking back on that, I think this topic on privacy challenges that are faced by HR is a good pointer to think about. And I'm sure that this slide, the slides that we prepared for that, is going to help our attendees to know these challenges and how in their organization they can make things a lot better, and what Tsaaro can also offer and help them to achieve those points.
Yeah, surely, Andrew. And considering HR is one function which has data from within the company and outside the company as well, it becomes imperative that the HR knows how to handle that data.
Exactly. That's like so true. And recently I came across this statement that says, like, you don't feel safe until you're really secure. So I was actually thinking what it means. It was during this time where I was preparing for a presentation, like for an internal meeting. So that time I was talking to our security team. So that time the statement just came to mind. It was like, you don't feel safe until you are secure. So I was thinking about it like at least an hour. I was just taking a time to think what it really means. But then, after I prepared the slide deck, I came to a realization that, even in your house, even when you're at the privacy of your house, we feel secure and safe only when our environment is safe. Only when we know that, we are not at risk. That is where all these, Article 1921 of our Constitution, all of those things come in, where nobody can just barge into our house in the middle of the night without a warrant or those kind of things. So that's how similar privacy is in terms of data as well, not just in a physical sense, but in the data sense too. Unless we feel as an employee that our data is safe with the given company, we don't really feel secure working for that company. If we are going to, if we are having that sense that they're going to monitor us or surveil us too much, I don't think no one will feel comfortable working for such a company. So that is a statement to think upon. You don't really feel safe until you're really secure.
And 7 minutes into webinar, and I already have a like huge takeaway. So you do not feel safe until you are secure, until you feel secure. That's a great line, Andrew, and I'll remember. Thank you so much. Yeah. So moving ahead. Okay, so we have a question for our audience. So to answer this question, please go to this website www.menti.com and use this code and write in your answers. So the question for you is, what are the different type of data that HR might collect?
I'm looking for some interesting answers. Knowing that there are quite a number of participants, some dubious data is something that I'm looking out for instead of the common one. So let your brain start thinking along these lines. What are the different data that you as a HR or you working for your company think that the HR is collecting from you, with you knowing or without knowing? So I'm looking for some really interesting answers. Quite an interesting set of answers that we've got. Interview recordings got my attention. Sometimes once we go into a company, we often forget our past in the sense that what data was collected for us during the context of employment, like during the time that we got hired. So background data is one that we often think about, but interview recordings, that is interesting because at that point of time, just imagine, right? In India, we want to get a job like real soon. We don't really think about where we give data and in what context. We just want share our resumes all across the world just to get into the job, and that is the time a lot of data collection happens. So that is an interesting answer that we've got.
Yeah, because when you want to get hired as soon as possible, you do not think at that point of time. You kind of in desperation, people overshare.
Exactly, exactly.
What
Yeah.
PII also goes through.
Yeah, so just drawing a point here is, since we're talking about the privacy challenges that are faced. So when I was talking back in my company to the HR way back in, I think 2018 or 19. So there is this obviously a jurisdictional space in the sense that context of culture changes. In India, people are different. In US, employees are different. So I've been traveling to different countries and I'm meeting different employees of our company. We can see a lot of difference in the way that they think and they perceive a given problem at hand. So in India, and in my company, they call it as one of the SaaS giants of India. So that being the case, people want to get a job here. So and now obviously they're hiring more, so the openings are greater. But there was this time, when the hiring was a little lesser, not in a very very fireful mode where they were hiring in huge numbers. So at that time, what the HR told was there are these people or these aspirants who want to get into the company, and they send emails to the HR team. They somehow find the email address of the HR team, more of an alias or something, and they send their Aadhaar number, their bank detail records, their IT filing records, everything that is needed for a background verification, even before they are taken the first round of interview. So they are so desperate in getting the job. So that's a context change that we have to consider when it comes to talking about data processing, and especially in an employment context in Europe. That is so not the case. They are very very careful. You have to ask them twice, get a lot of signatures from them before they even consent to sharing such a data. So that's a cultural aspect. That's a challenge as well.
And of course, many interesting answers here. Someone has written that even blood group is shared. What else is left? Yeah. So thank you for all the answers. Let's move ahead. Yeah. So now let's see like what all personal data is collected by HR. So we have individual's name, address, account number, date of birth, medical and health info. Almost, I think all of this was covered by the answers, right, Andrew?
Yeah, they are. So, um, regarding biometric identifiers, this is again a question to the attendees. Maybe you could just put it in the chat itself. So, in your organization, why do they collect biometric? I mean, we already got an answer, like for attendance records. So, okay, if that is the case, do you think it is necessary, or do you think is there a better way to maybe just capture attendance through some other means, a more privacy-friendly means compared to a biometric? Because to put it into perspective for those who are not too much into working on privacy, is biometric information is like your identity, like your name. Maybe you can put it in a gazette, or go to government office, you can change your name. Actually, that also is much better. You can throw off your old SIM card, you can replace your overall identity or your perceived identity, right? So how people look at you. But when it comes to your face or your finger or your thumbprint or a iris scan, nobody can change that. That is how we are created with such uniqueness that it is impossible to change your eyes or your fingers. So in that being the case, that weightage that is given to biometric information, do you think it is necessary for a biometric information to be taken for a given example? And it's not an abstract question that I'm making a very specific question. Is that for attendance, do you think biometric is important, or is there a better way? Do you think you can come up with a better solution for collecting attendance instead of a biometric? I think we're already getting some answers here.
Yeah, let's see the chat. It's for attendance and it's not necessary. Says Swati, biometric data if lost cannot be retrieved. Shankar, it said required for access is required but may not be for attendance. Attendance access can be achieved via other means. Okay. Card is a better way. Access card. Use access card. Can't find a better way. A smart access card can be an alternative. Biometric is not necessary in this case. So access card is a better way. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
so
access card wins the vote here.
yeah, access card. Okay, so since I worked on security itself, let me put a counter argument for that. I know it's too much to think on a Tuesday morning, but let's think about this, right? So we are talking about HR and privacy challenges. So how about an access card that can be easily? Obviously, an access card has either a chip or it's mostly based on an NFC, near field connectivity, which is your RFID or something, right? So that being the case, how easy is it to fake an access card? You can just have a skimmer. You can just easily, take someone's data, or if someone is walking on the road, you can just, have the card in their hand. And I've seen such kind of things happening, especially when I travel by train to my office. Is that they forget their card, they leave it off in the train itself, or they keep it in their pocket or something, they drop it off. So someone else can actually take your identity in the sense I'm talking about access card. So in a security perspective, to counteract our privacy perspective, is do you think cards are safer ways? Is that safe enough to verify your identity, saying that you are the only one? I'm just trying to pick our brains. Do you think biometric is necessary? If it is not, then you're saying card. If card is taken, then security wise, is this okay or not? And it's too much to ask, but you should be thinking about this as privacy people. Depends on the client requirement and the kind of data the organization wants to process. Okay, interesting. So yeah, that is almost something that we are going to talk about today also in one of our slides, is that a balance, a test of necessity and proportionality, finding if the risks that are given by a given processing of data, whether it is balancing with the rights, balancing with the needs of the organization. So that is where your DPIA is going to help. That's something we'll look upon the other slide. That's a good thing. It's a good perspective, and finding the right gap is finding the right center path for this is where it is important, depending on what the company needs, what data they want to process, what they don't, what they can or what they don't want to do. Like for example, my company, they don't have a biometric. They've gone on an access card. There is a risk, but they also have physical security people who look at the card and then let you swipe the card. So they can look at your face, look at the card, and then let you inside. So that is one way. Yeah, you can counteract that. It depends on the company culture. Yes, those are really good points.
Yeah, those were surely really interesting points, and they were like able to answer you, Andrew, as well. So moving
Yeah.
ahead, yeah. So what are the key changes that were brought in by GDPR regarding data processing and how data is handled?
So let me just quick, look at these couple of points. I mean, we've already. I didn't want to run through the slides typically because it would become a little boring. Because I'm used to such presentations, so I know how boring it gets. So that's why it is good that our participants are interacting and it's quite fun. So we've already discussed some of these portions actually, like what are the changes brought by GDPR. For example, DPI was one of those biggest changes. It's probably not in this slide, in the next slide, but DPI is one major change where privacy by design or data protection by design was something that was like a good to have before 2018, which is when the GDPR came. But after the GDPR came, privacy by design or data protection, to be precise, data protection by design was a mandate. It is illegal if you don't do it. It is to put that into perspective. So that is one major change that the GDPR brought. In addition to the other ones, for example, they have more rights. Employees have more rights compared to the 1995 directive, because GDPR is like this comprehensive data protection law covering all spaces, be it your health data, be it your financial data, everything, wherever there's personal information, there is GDPR. As simple as that. So that gives a blanket rules on how data should be governed, which in turn gives more rights, more privileges. Like the first statement that I said, you don't really feel safe until you are secure. So the GDPR has given more rights to people, so you can feel more secure, you can feel more safe, because you can exercise your right to access, your right to information, your right to correct wrong data. If any judgment is made by an artificial intelligence system and they have banned you from certain things, because obviously not in the security perspective, I'm not talking about that. For example, a wrong attempt in the wrong time to trying to log in at non-office hours is a flag. It's probably a suspicion. I'm not talking about those concepts, but something that has a legal effect on you, on your employment. GDPR gives you the right in that, in terms of, especially if it is based on artificial intelligence and such, automated decision making. So that gives a lot of rights, and it expands the scope not just to your organization or basically your HRs in your company. Rather, it goes one step higher to all of the other stakeholders who process the data, which is your vendors. So obviously there will be background verification vendors, companies who provide services for background verification. They have to disclose the data so that they can do the right type of background verification, so that you are not faking the company, you are not taking them for granted. So it is a balance. The US also has a lot of laws on that, but GDPR is like it's the elephant in the boardroom. And so that brought a lot of changes in terms of the mindsets of the CEOs and the CXOs in that suite, and they have in turn in many companies brought about a vendor lifecycle management program which never existed before. So it does not stop with just this company, rather it expands to everyone to whom your data as an employee is being disclosed by your company. Also, there is this great advantage that, adding to that point of, you don't feel secure until you feel safe, or you don't feel safe until you feel secure, whatever the combination is you have the right to be informed if your data has been breached. So that is your breach notification requirements, that you no longer need to worry about whether your data is hanging somewhere in the cloud. Rather, if the company knows that your data has been breached or prone to some vulnerability over some time, then your HR, or you as a HR, are supposed to notify your employees that such kind of a thing has happened. and obviously you are a data controller for the data. Your company is a data controller, so you have timelines on that, like 72 hours is the maximum that you can take before which you should notify them. So that being said, personal data is not restricted to just your name or your identifiers or your biometric. Rather, it is expansive. It including sensitive personal data. It is including your biometric data, genetic data, your religious beliefs, your political affiliations, or your belief system, your philosophical system. All of that comes under that. So even in maybe your performance ratings also comes under personal data, right? Because it has to talk about a person. Anything that can be used to identify a person is personal data. For example, think of the scenario in your office where I think many of us would be going back to office by now. I'm not sure, but if you are, or at least let's go back to the pre-COVID times, right? So looking at a person from afar, this is an example that I always quote, right? Look at a person afar who's walking in your company. uh, See and identify, or try to identify who that person is without looking at their face, just by looking at other characteristics. Say for example their dress color, their hairstyle. For example, some people have a really crazy hairstyle, and some people color dye their hair, looking blue and pink. So obviously from a distance, okay, this is that person. Or some people wear, for example, Mark Zuckerberg always wears a gray t-shirt for his easy reasons, right? To limit his number of decisions. So you can obviously know that it is Mark Zuckerberg even from afar without thinking about that. For example, we have an employee in our company who always wears the same color of shirt every day, very similar to Mark Zuckerberg. So we know that this is that person. We can easily guess even without knowing who that person is. So that is the importance of personal data, and GDPR has widened that. So any personal traits, any behavioral aspects, all of those also come under the definition of personal data, and it covers any employer, be it your European counterpart or your Indian counterpart or anyone who's processing data of a European employee. They are in turn now subject to GDPR. So the not just the vendor scope, but also if your company is worldwide, then, and if the data is being shared across different offices around the world, everyone is equally responsible for that. So that is how GDPR has revolutionized, I'd say, data protection compared to before. And yeah, more security has to be given, like encryption, pseudonymization, privacy by design. Those kind of things are also added or expanded or put into weightage by the GDPR. Yes, Siddharth.
Thank you for the insights, Andrew. And some of the participants have raised their hand. I would request you to please type in your questions in the chat. So moving ahead. Yes, we have one more Menti poll now, right? So again, go to the above link, join the code, and the question that we have now is: can employees exercise their right to data portability? So we have two votes. Yes, maybe.
That this gives us a perspective of, like, it's a ratio, I'd say about 50 or 60-40. Yeah, 40% of them say that it is possible, and I mean, sorry, 60% say it's possible, 40% say it is not, or maybe. That's a neutral stand. I always like to take neutral stands sometimes.
Case to case basis. Depends.
Yeah, it depends. Typical lawyer answers. Yes.
Yeah, depends.
Okay. So yeah, the answer is yes. They can actually use their right to data portability. GDPR does allow them, but obviously it is restricted and is subject to some limitations, I'd say, because, for example, your performance ratings is, you could argue it is a data that belongs to you, but actually it belongs to the company, and it is subject to confidentiality related things as well. So not all data can be disclosed, but the EDPP has given some advisories on that as well. And there are local regulations also. For example, in Germany, there are some regulations. In Netherlands, there are some local regulations, like the implementation of GDPR in an employment context, and advisories by work councils and peer groups. So they are the ones who are the people who govern or have a lot of say, like how we have trade unions in India, like this ITU. I'm not sure if that's the word, but the railways has unions. Manufacturing industries have unions, so they take care of the employee welfare. Similarly, in Europe, there are such kind of work councils who are people who govern or who have a say in in how an employee data should be processed for a given context. They are empowered to do that. So they have given some advisories. So I would not say it depends. They do have it is a right, yes, but not all data could be disclosed and in all circumstances. For example, if you're fired from a company and you exercise your right, you still have the right, but some reasons may not be disclosed, or some particular data that is very confidential to the company may not be disclosed. So there are limitations and there are restrictions, but yes, they do have a right. The answer is yes, but there are some restrictions.
Sangeeta said that somewhere she heard that GDPR is not directly applicable to employer-employee relationship with regard to data collected by employer. I think we have answered that now, Sangeeta.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, Sangeeta, is that it does apply. GDPR does apply in an employer-employee relationship, but consent as a legal basis may not be applicable, because if they have to ask your consent for background verification, then and you say no, then obviously they won't be able to verify you, which means they obviously won't be able to give you a job. So consent as a lawful basis, as a lawful ground for processing the data, may not be applicable in most cases because of imbalance of power. That's the keyword there. So employer has obviously the upper hand in that case. So they cannot. The consent becomes forced. It is no longer free. But GDPR does apply. GDPR does apply. All of the other rights and everything does apply.
Employee rights with GDPR. So these are the rights, some rights that the employee has under GDPR.
Yeah. So the right to rectify. So if you, for example, you're changing your house, you're moving to a new location, then already in India you do have the rights. So GDPR also gives you that right. It is more defined under the law in GDPR. Is that imagine a case where you shift your house and you forgot to inform your bank about this. They'd be sending your credit card statements to your old house, and someone else, some other old grandma, will be taking it up and reading and seeing what all you're paying, what all things you're purchasing, or even your Amazon. Sometimes I do that. I forget to change my address on top before I do the delivery because of some carelessness or something, and it goes to my old house, and that auntie in that house, she calls me up and say, "Baya, you got something?" I'm like, okay, okay, I'll come and pick it up. So you can use your right to rectify, to edit and delete incorrect information, to correct your information that is wrongly updated in the system. So, for example, your blood group, maybe due to some careless mistake by the people entering the data, if they've given it wrong, it can have a really bad impact on you. Uh, for example, in my company's ID card, the blood group is actually printed in India, not in other countries. And the reason I asked them, I asked them why they do that. You have your name, you have your photo, and your emergency contact number and your blood group. So that's it they have. So I was asking them why. So the reason was a safety reason. So they're trying to balance the safety versus privacy reason also. Safety in the term is, our company is quite a little far away from the city, so you have to drive, or you have to catch a train or a bus or some public transport. So if you meet, yes, that's the right point. In case you meet with an accident, and they have to take you to the hospital or something and give some blood transfusion, the safety reason is more important. Saving your life is more important compared to processing your data at that point of time. They cannot wake you up and ask you for your blood group at that time. So that is a safety reason. So balance there is also important, similar to our access card story that we just discussed some time back. uh, and the case when you leave a company, you move out of a company, um, in Europe, you do have a right to ask them to delete or to forget your information, but that is very, very restricted. They cannot delete every information because there are tax reasons, audit purposes for which they have to retain for a longer period. For example, your financial records, how much of tax you had paid to the government through the company, is a record they have to maintain for at least 8 years in the Europe. Even in India, according to the Information Tax Information IT Act, also you're supposed to. I'm talking about the Income Tax Act. Sorry. So according to that, you're supposed to retain data for a longer period of time. So not all data can be forgotten. Maybe, let's say, after 5 years after you quit a company and you exercise your rights, maybe they will delete your, for example, if you're given for a mediclaim, right, your medical insurance or something, maybe they can delete your siblings information, your parents information. Those kind of things can be deleted, depending on the context of the company. If that company is company with more safety hazards, for example, you're working in an industry such as a manufacturing industry or coal mining industry or those kind of cases, then they have to keep your health record for a longer period of time. So it's very subjective. Even in Europe, it is very subjective. So you do have a right to be forgotten, but it is very limited. We already discussed data portability. So going to right to object is for certain type of information. For example, we just talked about biometric fingerprints or such kind of things for attendance. So I heard of a company where they wanted to come up with a facial recognition system for attendance. So what they did was when they joined the company, they took a photo of you, right? So they wanted to use all those photos to put it to that engine to do it. Maybe you could do that in Indian context. Maybe it is not a great problem. They really don't raise any red flags. But in European context, if you have collected data according to GDPR, if you collected data for a given purpose and you're using it for another purpose, then you should have a valid lawful basis for doing that. Whether consent is possible, maybe in this case, maybe it is possible because you still have a backward compatible system. You can still go back to an access card system, or the company may choose to balance both. Like whoever wants to make your life easy by doing a facial scan, maybe you can opt for this. But if you're still okay to carry your access card, maybe you can go for that. They can do such kind of balancing as well. It depends on the company, I'd say. Oh, I just said it depends. Okay. So,
Depends.
so the right to object is also part of that, where a company has collected a person's data for a given purpose. If they use it for a secondary purpose, they have a default right to object to that, unless you have another valid reason, such as a legitimate interest. Even in that case, you have a right to object. But if you have given your consent, then you have a right to withdraw your consent. But if it is for a legal obligation or on a vital interest or those kind of cases, you don't have an abstract right. For example, disclosing your blood group to a hospital vendor when you have met with an accident, you don't have a right to object to that because it's a vital interest. It is a
Right.
case where they have to do it. Yeah.
And the Pashankar writes, can archiving be considered as the right to be forgotten?
No, that doesn't work because the reality is that when you archive data, so I'm a technology person, so when you actually archive data, data is just kept in its form, in a compressed form, in another machine. Generally, that is the typical way of archiving. There are other ways also, like removing certain identifiers. So that is where privacy engineering helps. So when you archive data, it depends on what data you are going to archive, depends on what columns you are going to archive, depends on what the combination of columns. They call it a K identity. K identity means that when you pair up columns, when you pair up some databases, whether you're able to again recollect or go back to the main database. If that is the case, then the employee is no longer forgotten because you can still relate and identify who that person is. Right. So archiving by itself, to give a blanket answer, it cannot be considered right to be forgotten. It has a lots of caveats. It has a lot of stars, terms and conditions apply sort of things, where it depends on a lot of restrictions and the way that you do it.
Again, one more question. Interesting. So again, go to the Menti link. And the question for this time is, are HRs accountable towards data subjects?
So it's again 80-20 relationship, I'd say. So 80% have said yes and 20% have said no, or
Okay.
maybe. Okay, depends. Okay. So for those who said no or maybe, well, unfortunately, that is not the answer. The answer is yes. Here, the data subject refers to your employees. So if you are in Europe or even in India, right, you as a HR are are in a position where you are supposed to be accountable to employees for their benefits or for their insurances or for their termination, onboarding, everything. You are accountable. So similarly, if you are processing the data, you are accountable to them. So the data subject are your employees. So the answer is yes, they are accountable because obviously the company is accountable. That no doubt about that. But since HR are the people who process data on an ongoing basis about employees for various reasons. So that being the case, it is this associative or the commutative property that you talk about in statistics and probability. A cross B, denotes or simply implies that B cross A. So the company is accountable to the employees. So the employees are accountable to the company, and you just go with the derivation and find you see HRs are accountable to employees. at the end of the day. So the answer is yes.
And Triveni asked, what about the data employers store when the employee used company laptops? Can we object in this case?
I'd like some more clarity on that question because it is a bit subjective. Okay, but let me just give a top level overview from what I understand. Is when they have given you an asset of a company, say for example a laptop or a phone, you are obviously bound by certain rules, such as an acceptable use policy. For that sake, it defines what you can do and what you cannot do with the device. For example, a bring BYOD policy, bring your own device policy. They would have told clearly that what situations are allowed, what are not allowed. For example, if you're using an office laptop and you want to store your personal information, for example, some photos or something in your personal laptop, I mean, in your office laptop, then for example in my company what we've done that is we while they give you a laptop itself, they give you a folder that's specifically named under your name, probably under your documents or your desktop or somewhere, under which you're supposed to store. If you store anywhere else, the company has the right to search across that places. So there are multiple ways. Again, that is where these HR lawyers actually help. Employment, there are employment lawyers who are really skilled in those things, so they can help according to the company's policy, according to what is the law of the land, what does the work council say. Considering all these things, they can help you come up with a policy. So at the end of the day, it boils down to the policy. Is that if your company says don't use your personal data, I mean your company laptops for your personal use, then you're ideally not supposed to use that. Like some companies have disabled their USB cards or those kind of things. Access to certain websites are disabled because they know that you can upload corporate data there, or you can download personal data from those websites or from that locations. So it is totally topical or policy driven in that case, and employment lawyers and what the work council says takes a lot of importance. And obviously your DPIA is one of your go-to document there. If you balance the rights, for example they have given you an office laptop and you are storing personal data there, then you do have certain rights under certain circumstances. So that your DPIA will help you to identify those places where to put the rules, where not to put, where you can be more flexible. So Preeti has another question. Is sorry, but I would like to understand how HR is accountable. It is not the company who will be responsible. HR the subcontrollers. Ideally, Preeti, I mean, I do get to your point. The perspective is right, but just take a step back and see. At the end of the day, right? So let's take the case of a customer support. For example, a support guy does not respond properly to a customer. Who gets blamed? Obviously it's the mistake of that support guy who has not done his job, but ultimately if you go to Twitter of that company and see the CEOs being tagged, obviously they are accountable, you are right, but it is due to it is, I'd say, a shared responsibility, because the company and the CEO or the CHRO has trusted that responsibilities to each of the people working in the department. So I'd say it's a shared responsibility. Usually within a company we don't see controller, subcontroller, those kind of things. There's no word actually called subcontroller. So it's an equal responsibility. The company is responsible, and as you as a HR, you are part of the team, so you are equally accountable is what it means.
And as a jargon, it is always said that we'll see where the buck stops. So when we'll start to find responsibilities, of course, the person who was handling the data, so they'll be held responsible in the end. So it is company responsibility, but the person who was actually handling the data, it will also be their responsibility.
Yeah, the interesting scene is that in India's data protection bill, I mean, it's been a while, so I might be wrong, or I might be not updated on that. But I just remember seeing that. I think in 2019 when the bill came out, or 2020, I'm not sure. So I remember seeing this clause. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, so please forgive some if some of my statements are wrong. But the person who did this, this is the Indian law, right? So
Mhm.
what does it say is, if you make a mistake, then your manager and the entire team or the entire company, whoever the managing team is, all of them will be subject to criminal penalties. Is what the law says. And I'm just paraphrasing that. I'm not exactly
Yeah, yeah.
quoting it. But not just the person, but including the manager who allowed that, or including the manager who did not do their job in stopping that. All of them, in security we call it as collusion.
Mhm.
Where everyone takes a negative stance against something. So that's a good way of putting that into perspective. Is yeah, like Veena says, a stricter liability. So not just one person, the entire team is part of the soup. Like Siddharth just said, the buck stops here. Where does it stop? That talks about that. So it's an entire team that gets put on hold because of that.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah. So moving ahead. So how can HR comply with GDPR?
There aren't anything new in these. Is that everyone, I know these are just the principles. If you're building a privacy management system, these are the common principles that usually come up with, or even any management system usually has a communication aspect, usually has a policy aspect. It always has do's and don'ts which are enforceable on the people. Then so this is just adding on those points. So if you need to comply with GDPR or any law for that matter, you should first of all start with knowing what data you have and what data you process. So, which is your inventory. Know, like, once you know what you are doing or what you're not doing, putting things into track or prioritizing your actions will be easier. So take an inventory of the data. Second is put the necessary controls. So what does the law say for a given type of data? Put the necessary controls. Do your gap assessment. As simple as that. So do your gap assessment. Review your policies. What are the company policies say? What does the existing policy say? And because of this law, what are the changes that this policy needs to undergo? Then what are the rights? We know that we just saw the rights that an employee has. So how to make it practical? How to put it into practice? If some person says, I have a wrong information, correct it. Then you should ideally have maybe a service desk or an email to which alias to which they can send an email or raise a ticket or something like that. Make a mechanism that works. Improve your security. That's an important thing. Is you don't feel safe until you're secure, or so you need to be secure. Your data should be secured. You are safe in your house because you have walls, because you have windows, because you can see outside if somebody is coming. You have grill gates, you have CCTVs, all of that. So your security, your physical perimeter is also important. So encryption of data, limiting access to only those who need, those are some key things that is going to help. And at the end of the day, in security they say that your employees are the weakest links in the chain. So that is a hard reality that we have to face. If people are not careful, if any of your, say for example, your new joiners in your company are not careful, the company is going to suffer if they cause a breach because of their ignorance or because of their non-awareness. So awareness is so important. So GDPR as a culture, data protection as a culture in the company can go a long way. It is no longer a compliance activity, rather it becomes an enjoyable part of our life, right? So that is more important as a culture. If you have the right mindset, obviously everything's going to be in place. So these are some of the typical points that we cover when it comes to ensuring that we comply with GDPR.
In addition to what Andrew said, so what we have done at Tsaaro is that we have also prepared a GDPR checklist for the HRs, right? So I'll be sharing the checklist with you soon, and like we'll be seeing it on screen as well. So with that checklist might help you to understand like how to uh, implement a GDPR privacy program in your organization, and you can assess your current situation as well. So yeah, so you must have seen it. Varsha has received, like Varsha has sent it on the chat for everyone to read. Other than that, if you have any questions, you may now type in your questions as well. So this would be our final mentee poll here. So is providing notice to data subjects required before any transfer of their data?
Still about, it's 90-10%,
Yeah.
90% and 10%. Okay. So actually, the answer is yes. We should provide notice. Notice here simply means that for this particular purpose, we are disclosing your data. For example, for a background verification, we are transferring your data to this vendor to carry out background checks, or it could be for processing your payroll, where your data is being shared to this particular vendor. In Indian context, maybe it is maybe not so pronounced, but in Europe, it is mandatory to give a notice. In the US, for example, for certain type of data, certain type of consent has to be got, like your FCRA regulations, your FATCA regulations. There are many such regulations under which, if your credit report is being used, by a company for your background check, then they should provide a notice to you and get your consent within a particular time period in the US, for example. So, but in a general sense, providing notice to data subject is the best way. That is where your employee privacy policy becomes important. So that is where you tell your employees how their data on different contexts will be processed. So yes, the answer is yes. And I think we have a couple of questions. If notice provided during the onboard has transfer related clauses, is the notice still required before transfer of data? In the US, yes. In the US, it is yes. In India, it is maybe. In Europe, it is yes. So even if you let them know during during their onboarding, at the time, this is called contextual compliance, right? So just in time notices, that is a keyword here. So before an action is done, you let them know. So yeah, that is the answer. You should let them know.
So I'll stop sharing here. And thank you, Andrew, for being a part of this webinar and for answering all the questions. You have been very kind to us this whole time, right?
Thanks,
Uh,
Siddharth. Thanks for having me. It was interesting to talk on this topic today.
yeah. And for all the participants, we have shared all the resources with you. The PPT that I was sharing has been shared with you. The checklist that we have prepared for you has been shared with you. Other than that, you can follow us on LinkedIn and you can reach out to there if you have further questions, right? And we have a WhatsApp group as well. You can, and the link is there in the chat. You can be a part of that group as well for more updates, right? And of course, we have upcoming webinars coming in this week. So we have a webinar for IT professionals and marketing professionals as well within this week, right? So it would be great if you reach out to IT professionals and marketing professionals who are working in your organization to come and sit in these webinars, because of course, these will help them out in understanding data privacy better and how they can comply better, right? And with that, I would like to thank everyone for coming in. Yeah, thanks a lot for logging in and attending the webinar.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much.